Hey guys, welcome to another video of UPSC hacks. This is a brief intro. I'm Resh Nashi. I'm an engineer teaching the IS. We are doing economics currently, and this is our second video in the series. We will be targeting economic growth and measures. This is one of the most important videos that you need to go through, and it's one of the frequently asked topics, and you need to know this for mains primarily, and prelims you need to know the basics of what it is. So what we mean by economic growth and its measures, we have the GDP first. So what is GDP? In the newspapers you might have heard GDP of this country is this, GDP of India has grown, GDP of India is going to be negative this year because of the COVID-19 crisis. I know this is a very sad occurrence, but yeah, scientists were predicting a pandemic on a global scale for quite some time now, because they predict about every 100 years humanity has to undergo some kind of pandemic where there's a constant fight between the bacteria and viruses and our immune system. So this is a science and technology topic. So yeah, you need to know the difference between virus and a bacteria. That's pretty important. But for our terms here, that is not really important. So coming to what is GDP. GDP is the total market value of all final goods and services produced within the given unit, that is the country. So it's the total market value. You should always remember it is market value, GDP at market value, unless and otherwise they specify GDP as real, or the other word for is constant prices. It is to be assumed that the GDP is calculated at market value. What is the difference between this real GDP, the GDP, and this real or constant prices GDP? So basically GDP, when they add up, is they take the current selling price of a good and then they add it up and how much was it produced, and they add everything up, and then they come up with this GDP number at the current market value. But the current market value may not be real picture of what is actually happening in the economy if you want to compare it over years. That's why you need to deflate it or inflate it depending on the level of inflation or deflation happening in the economy. Why is this inflation and deflation happening? Because of various factors, one being the supply, the second one being the government and the central bank push. So if the government and central bank are filling in a lot of money or pushing a lot of money into the system, that will drive up inflation. So that happened in the last decade. And similarly, if they are trying to pump out liquidity in the economy, the opposite happens, that is disinflation. When inflation is in negative, then it becomes deflation. But if inflation reduces, that's called disinflation. So hope you are clear with that. So inflation, disinflation, and deflation. I will do a separate detailed video on inflation and its measures, because that is one of the key issues that RBI and the government tackles in order to maintain price stability. So as you can see, price stability has been a major issue from the Tughlaq times or from the Delhi Sultanate times. You must remember Muhammad bin Tughlaq actually introduced token currency, which was the first in the world, mainly to control prices in the market so that his army could have what they need under the salary that he was paying. And mind you, he was paying by salary, unlike the Mughals, who later on started giving out grants. Or even before that, there used to be, the army were supposed to be supplied by local chieftains. So when you have a salary, paid working class, then you need to make sure that your prices are in the market are affordable for these forces. So coming back to GDP, one key item you need to remember that even goods produced by foreigners, that means not Indian nationals, is counted into the GDP. For example, you might be an Indian living abroad and working there, so the output of your work is considered in that nation's GDP. Similarly, another person who must be of some other nationality working in India, his output will be considered into the GDP of India. Moving on, next is the GNP. What is this GNP? Here, this is the gross national product. This is the gross domestic product. Gross domestic product. This is gross national product. So as you can see, the main key word here is national. So it is basically GDP plus net factor income. So this net factor income can be positive or negative. Why? It is the earnings of Indians overseas minus earnings of overseas citizens in India. So in India's case, this is a huge positive. But in other developed countries like US, UK, this is a huge negative. So that's why you have America telling of outflow of money through the skilled class or skilled workers, because highest remittance happens from Indians into the Indian's economy. The same thing you can see from Saudi Arabia into the Indian economy. So biggest inflow of foreign exchange comes through the remittance of overseas employed Indians. So our GNP gets boosted up. So if GNP is greater than GDP, that is a good inflow of FX happens. In the opposite scenario, outflow of foreign exchange is happening. So I hope this is clear for you. Why inflow of FX is happening, foreign exchange? Because people overseas are earning in dollars or in pounds or in yuan. Yuan is the currency of China. So if they are earning in that currency and you are sending it back to India, that means that much amount of currency of that country is coming back into India, which is good for our foreign exchange reserves. So that's one advantage of GNP. So hope you have come to understand what is GDP and GNP now. Now we go to NNP. What is NNP or NDP? Is net national product or net domestic product. The word net is important here. Net means you are netting off something or deducting something from the GDP or GNP. So basically here NNP is your removing depreciation from your gross national product. So what happens? Depreciation usually is taken at straight line methods for most companies, and it is an assumed value. So basically you assume your car is zero value after 10 years or about 5 years. Though practically you might get some amount, but for account keeping purposes and to calculate depreciation, you assume that it might become zero by 10 years or 5 years. So if you remove that from your gross national product, you get your net national product. And this is also called as the national income at market prices. So I have told you the difference between market prices and constant prices and or real GDP. Now again, you see national income at factor cost. This is another way of calculating your national income. What we were talking about GDP, here will also give you national income, but through outputs. This factor costing is factors of production, which is your land, labor, capital, LLC. So these costs, this is the input method of measuring a national income. So factor cost, it's the sum of all the incomes earned by the suppliers of factors of production: land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. So for example, someone is renting out a land to build some factory. So that income, factory rent income, plus the machinery someone else has given money, so that is the capital goods income that he is earning from that, plus the workers what they earn, wages that has been paid, right, and plus the promoter's income who's providing the entrepreneurial services to the company. So all of this, if you add, you will get to a national income. So that this has been added for all the companies in India, and it is done on a massive scale. And when we are talking about national income here, you need to know that the first national estimate for India was done by Dadabhai Naoroji. This is there in your modern Indian history. He also postulated the theory of drain of wealth. From India, and this was the main argument that led to the Swadeshi movement, and later on influenced the Indian National Congress and the nationalist leaders. The next committee after independence in 1995 was formed with the head as P.C. Mahalanobis. Mahalanobis is an eminent statistician. He is also the founder of the Central Statistical Organization, CSO, and also the Central Statistical Institute, which is a good national institute to study statistics. I think recently Amartya Sen's good friend and co-writer John Dersey, you must have heard of him in news. He also he graduated from the National Statistical Institute, which was set up by P.C. Mahalanobis, and there were two other members, V.K.R.V. Rao and Gadgil. So they suggested that the national income must be estimated by the Central Statistical Organization. So even today, national income is measured by the Central Statistical Organization. Next we come to GVA. What is this GVA? Gross value add. That is basically removing the GDP out of the indirect taxes that were charged. You must remember that India charges one of the highest indirect taxes on goods. Indirect taxes are those taxes which are on the good. Direct taxes are those taxes which are directly onto the people's income. So the income threshold right now is 8 lakhs. So if you are earning below 8 lakhs, you don't have to pay any taxes, I think, currently. So hence a lot of people, then there were studies like about 90% of India falls below this threshold. So you have very less direct tax collection. So to supplement the loss in direct tax, government imposes indirect taxes. For example, your GST, SGST, your excise tax, mostly on liquor and petroleum product yield the government the highest amount of revenues. If you look into the statistics, you see about 50 to 60% is made up, almost 60 to 70% is made out of petroleum taxation and excise taxes, and every state is earning a lot from liquor sales. That's why you see during lockdown you have newspaper pushing for liquor, release of liquor sales. That is because the government actually makes a lot of money through these taxing these things. liquor, tobacco and petrol and diesel. So also you should remember national income is what? Net national product, which is your GNP minus depreciation minus your indirect taxes. You add back your subsidies. So you might see the government giving a lot of subsidies. Subsidy is, you have subsidy on inputs for farming, right? So this actually, is lowering your input costs artificially. And in order to, bring back your national income by adding back the subsidies, you get the true picture of it. Then one more important concept you need to know is this GDP per capita. So you have the total economy, how much it is earning, you divide it by the population and you get to the GDP per capita, which actually gives the reasonable amount of standard of living in that country. Standard of living is very, very important. So if you can see in this next description here, you can compare GDP per capita in dollars. So one more thing you need to understand, it is always in dollars when you're comparing countries, mainly because the dollar is considered as the standard international exchange currency, and that is why every country measures its economy in dollars when they are doing a cross country comparison. You see the US per capita GDP is $65,062. So right now it is around 76 rupees into 60, assuming $65,000, you get their yearly average income per capita. That means how each and every person in US is expected to earn or is about to earn about 30 lakh. Is it 30 lakhs? Yes, 30 to 40 lakhs per annum. This is their standard per capita income. So way down you come and see right here is India, which is at $2,000 per capita. So Indians on an average earn about, into 75, or if you assume 70, about 2 lakh rupees per annum. So this kind of gives you a huge potential gap. Where is 2 lakh? 2 lakh times 20 gives you 40 lakhs. So that means the person in US is earning 20 times more than a person in India for the same amount of jobs that are done. That gives you standard of living. That means people also spend that much out of their expenses. So that's why you see in US about 30 to 40, there is a mandatory tax about 30% or to 40% in California on people's income, where direct tax make a big chunk of the US government's income. So it makes a good comparative analysis on this, and you can compare countries. But here you see this is mainly dependent on your FX exchange rates. In 2000, early 2010s, the dollar used to cost hardly around 40 to 50 rupees, and then it started sliding down. Now it is at around 76, and early in 1990s it used to be around 20 to 30 rupees per dollar. As gradually India opened up, we did lot of trade with US, and then we are importing a lot more than what we are exporting to US, hence you have the higher exchange rate. So this kind of distorts the actual living standards of the people in the country, right? So that's why people came up with something called as the purchasing price parity, PPP. We will learn this later on, But briefly, purchasing price parity or some consultants firm like McKinsey came up with the Big Mac index. How much does a Big Mac? Big Mac is a type of burger you find in McDonald's in US, would cost in different countries, because the Big Mac uses certain ingredients like bread, onions, the meat, and all of that would make up that Big Mac. How much would it cost in US? That would cost around $14 to $15. How much would it cost in India? So in India, they compare it with the Maharaja Mac, which costs around 200 rupees. So if you do a direct comparison, if it is around $20 for a Big Mac in US, that becomes around possibly around 1500 rupees, but here you're getting it for 200 rupees. So that is your exchange distortion happening between the standard livings of the countries. Going on, we'll talk about GDP estimation. So as I had told already, when we talked about the net national income at factor prices, we have three ways of estimating GDP. First is the output approach. That means it's sum of all output products produced that year. So you have to keep in mind that GDP does not consider products that have been produced in the previous year or the years before. Although if you resell, so you have a car and you resell and you pay a broker some fee, that fee can be added, but products that were produced before are generally not counted for the GDP calculation. Second, your expenditure approach, that is your factors of production. How much wages you paid, how much machinery was used. Machinery usage is calculated in terms of depreciation. How much land rent you paid. So all of that is added up and you come up. And then the income approach, how much each one in the whole chain of production earned. For example, how much did the investor earn, how much did the CEO earn, how much did all the workers earn, how much did the distributor earn, how much did the final seller earn. So if you add all of that up, and generally in ideal state it should all be same. So output approach, expenditure approach, income approach should all tally with each other, but due to some distortions in the system, because you are estimating of a country and with innumerable transactions, there won't be an exact match, but it should be pretty close enough. So like I said, GDP measures only marketed goods. No inherent services. For example, you're a family of 4 and your wife is handling housework, is not counted as an income, because housework, if you didn't have a wife, or then this would be paid service. So you would pay a nanny, a cook, or you would eat out. So this is not actually monetized. It is a hidden cost and it's not put into GDP. And as I said, only final goods and services are measured. Why only final? Intermediate goods. For example, you have aluminium. So a company producing aluminium has produced some 6 million tons. So you take that. How much has it sold? So that is if the company's final output is aluminium, then that is added into GDP. But you have a company that is having like cars, for example, you have many components going into the car. You won't do a GDP calculation of final point of those. If those components are manufactured by the company, you're not adding up all of those components and then adding also the final output of the car. You just take the finished good of that car. So if you take the value of the car and add it into the GDP, then like I said, it's only newly produced goods and services for that year. And then as I have given, resale services by agents I've already covered. There is this imputed values. So for the purpose of GDP, the government assumes that all houses are rented. So even if you're living in your own house, the government assumes that it is rented, and the rental value of those properties that you're living in is added into the GDP as a rent for calculation purposes. So those automatically added values which are calculated and added into the system is called as imputed values, which is automatically calculated. One more thing we need to keep in mind is transfers payments. What is this transfer payment? Basically your PM Kisan payments, your Narega payments, your Ujjwala Yojana, your Indira Gandhi Matritya Sahyoga Yojana, where government is directly putting money into accounts of citizens or eligible citizens. For example, you will have thresholds like BPL, APL. So those are direct transfers. So those, should they be considered in GDP or not? They are actually not considered in GDP because there is no there is no profit out of it, or the government is not earning anything out of it. It's just like a conditional transfer, one-way transaction, where the government is basically acting like a income redistribution machine. So it takes from everyone and then supplements the income of those poorest of poor in the society. So what is DBT, direct benefit transfer? UBI is universal basic income. So there was talks about having everyone in the country having certain amount of basic income. It is there in Denmark. So if you're unemployed, they pay you around 1000 kroners per month or euros per month. And if you're under 18, I think they cover all your school and college expenses. So Denmark is a good place to be in. But India was trying to get into that basic UBI, and there were fascinating studies on how much does the government with all its subsidy come up to per capita. So how much subsidies they are giving completely, and how much will it cost to give direct money to everyone in the country. So it worked out to be around 500 to 600 rupees per person. So if assuming around 30% of Indian citizens are above pretty well off and won't require, assuming another 70%, I think would receive about 1000 rupees per month. So this is the amount of money we are spending, or the government of India is spending on their citizens. But mind you, the Indian population is above 1 billion mark with huge inequalities. Like in my first lecture, we talked about Kuznets curve, where you have inequality and income grow or per capita income. So you see, it should actually come down in the long run, but India is supposed to be around somewhere here where inequality is higher and the per capita income is somewhere in the middle, and it should go further so that we have even distribution of income. So people will earn more, and if there were economic offenses or any other kind of offenses, the government can take severe penal action, like now which you see with the recent ILFS case and the Kingfisher case, etc. Like I said, I have already explained this market price and factor cost. Market price is the actual transacted cost. That includes this includes GST and other charges by the government. Factor cost is the input cost, like I said before. Again, market price to factor cost, there is this equation which is pretty important. Market price is equal to factor cost plus income tax minus subsidies. That gives your market price. For example, market price of a good is around 10 rupees. For, let us assume, for apple, one apple is at 10 rupees. You have put fertilizers and labor all of it costs about 5 rupees per apple, and the government is giving 2 rupees subsidy per apple. And 1 rupee is your tax, right? So your factor cost is what? Subsidy is at 2 rupees, your factor cost should be 7 rupees, not 5 rupees, sorry. So you pretty much find out by this, you know the tax and you know the subsidy and you know the market price, you can come up to factor cost. So imagine if the apple costed 15 rupees and tax was what, 2 rupees, and your subsidy was 2 rupees. Basically your factor cost would be 15 minus 2 minus 2, that is equal to 11 rupees, right? So if the factor prices have increased, like I saw and you saw in the other example, that means there is an increase in the input goods. So basically there's inflation in the economy happening. Now we come to another concept where I've already covered in the first slide, which is a real and nominal GDP. Nominal GDP is the normal GDP without adjusting for inflation. So that is the GDP at market prices. Real GDP is the current year's GDP valued at the base year. So you would have seen in 2015 the government revised, or the Central Statistical Organization revised, the base year calculation for many of the indices and including GDP. And then there was this whole controversy of whether the GDP was inflated in the previous decade or not. So that came about because every time the CSO adjusts its base year, which is recommended to be at around every 5 years, the base should be changed. The CSO does a back series estimation of the GDPs. So it's a fairly standard procedure. There was no controversy about it, and there is always a variation of 1 or 2% up or down between the calculation when they change the base year. What is this base year? This base year is, so to calculate GDP they assume a year as your base. So if it is 2010-11 is the base year that has been adopted, that means the base value of that year will be equal to 0. So that means the prices of goods in 2010-2011, for example, this pen costed about 10 rupees that time, and now in 2019 it is costing about 20 rupees. That means there is a increase in its value or increase in GDP year over year from 2010 to here about 100%. So there is 100% growth in the price of the pen. That means it roughly doubled. But if it still remains at 10 rupees, that means there is 0% growth. Or if it has increased by only 1 rupee, that is 1% growth. So I'm sure you're getting the gist of what I'm trying to get at here. So that base year basket of goods prices determine the growth. And what is this GDP deflator? So as I have told you, government pumps in money, it would drive up inflation. Therefore, to offset this inflation, the CSO uses something called as a GDP deflator. Basically, it deflates the GDP by the amount of inflation in the economy. For example, now I said there was 100% growth in the value of this pen, which used to cost in 2010 10 rupees, and now it costs 20 rupees. In that, there is inherent inflation of about 5 rupees. And if you actually factor that in, you see the growth is 50%. Right? Usually, if the deflator is negative, the nominal GDP is less than the real GDP. So that is what happened here, right? Your nominal GDP was 800%. It fell to 50% because of the inflation of 5 rupees. But if it is the other way around, it includes, sorry, yeah. So if the deflator is negative, then there is now so there is not a deflation or disinflation happening here. In the same way, if your real GDP is greater than your nominal GDP, that means there is a inflation. There is a growth in the real economy. That means it's really increasing the incomes among the people. So here you can see the GDP and the GVA on a graph. You see the 2008 financial crisis here. Then it is coming on strong. You will see one more here in 2020 because of COVID. That impact is about 4%. So the impact of the growth of COVID is estimated to be around 5%. That means our GDP in 2020 has a good chance of going to negative, or the economy is contracting. So when the GDP goes to negative values, the economy is shrinking or contracting. So that is a basic concept you need to know, and that might happen this year, which is a sad thing to say, but it might happen. We'll wait and see. So there is this question that I have picked out for you from 2011. So a rapid increase in the rate of inflation sometimes attributed to base effect. So you must be remembering that we talked about base effect. What is base effect? Please choose the right answer and comment on the links below. So if we want to solve it right now, you can think about this. It is the impact of drastic deficiency in supply due to failure of crops. So here it is talking about supply shock inflation. Inflation is due to inadequate supply. This was happening in 2010-2012. Second one, it is the impact of surge in demand due to rapid economic growth. So this also causes inflation, which was happening in the past decade. It is the impact of price levels of previous year on the calculation of inflation rate. So this is your base effect. So this is your answer, C. Okay, thank you guys. This is Amresh Nashi signing off. Please like, subscribe and share this video. Have a good day.